The tools for achieving your wellness goals are right outside your door. You just have to know where to look, and I'm here to help. I'm Missy, an East Texas Christian herbalist, here to share conversations about local plants, where to find them and what to do with them, local vendors, the area's top sources for natural health products, and local practitioners, the professionals you can trust to get to the root of whatever you face. Whether you're here to learn, connect, or live more in step with the land, you're in the right place. Welcome. I want you to do something today, and it's probably going to feel a little weird at first, but just go with me. Today's herb is one of my absolute favorites for its effectiveness and versatility, and plus it grows like crazy in my area, so it's basically free, and I want to tell you about it. And to help you remember, I have a rhyme, but you gotta say it with me. So here's how it's gonna go. I'm gonna say, what's bee balm's charm? Then I want you to say this out loud if you can. So I say, what's bee balm's charm? And you say, kills bugs, calms guts, and soothes alarm. You can say it in your head if you're at work or something, but if you say it there in your head, say it extra loud. So I say, what's bee balm's charm? You say, kills bugs, calms guts, and soothes alarm. Okay, you ready? Here's your first chance. What's bee balm's charm? I didn't hear you. You're supposed to say, kills bugs, calms guts, and soothes alarm. Let's do it one more time. What's bee balm's charm? Kills bugs, calms guts, and soothes alarm. That's right. Okay, now let's unpack it. But you be ready, because I'm going to ask again, and I want you to just jump in with the answer every time I ask you, what's bee balm's charm? Now, there are multiple plants called bee balm. Today, I'm talking about Monarda species. If you're in East Texas, Monarda punctata is the one that most commonly grows wild. You'll see it this time of year at the edges of disturbed land or on the side of the highway. It gets about knee high and it has these round pink balls. So at first, you'll see the plant produce one ball, and then pretty soon there's another one on top of that and another one on top of that, kind of like an ice cream cone with multiple scoops. That's Monarda punctata. I've heard it called spotted horsemint too. When I first heard of bee balm, I read about it on a blog called Eat the Weeds, and the writer made a bunch of claims about it that sounded kind of crazy, so it stuck in my mind. And that spring, when I found it growing on our land, I thought, hey, there's a bunch here, let's harvest a bunch. And I had so much, I looked at it and I thought, I will probably never use all of this. When I chewed a leaf the first time of bee balm, my reaction was like, whoa, like hot and spicy are the words that come to mind, but not hot and spicy like cayenne or ginger. It has its own unique kind of heat. So I took the plant home and I made a tea out of it, and wow, I did not know what to expect. And it was, if you haven't tasted it, I can't describe it. And if you have, you know what I mean. That first time, it was like drinking warm hospital disinfectant. Like, that's what came to mind. It wasn't good. I wish I could be more precise, but maybe if you're curious, you'll try it for yourself. It activates all your senses, and you really can't decide if it's good or bad. You're like, I know there's a lot of something going on, but I'm not really sure how I feel about it. Anyway, I had a bunch. So I didn't use it sparingly. Herbs that are harder to get or that are expensive, I'm not as likely to just experiment with, but I had so much bee balm, I kept reaching for it, and it just kept delivering. And before it was in bloom again, the next year, I found my supply was all used up and I really needed more. So the next year, I gathered, again, what I thought was way more than I thought I'd ever use. And believe it or not, I ran out again. And I'm going to tell you, as many uses as I can remember, but I'm sure that there are some I've forgotten because it's just such a handy plant. Before I go in, I want to mention a few other Monardas. Monarda fistulosa does grow wild in these here parts. It just doesn't grow as prolifically. I've seen it, but I don't see it everywhere like I do Monarda punctata. Monarda didyma, I've not seen, but all three Monarda, fistulosa, punctata, and didyma, they all have similar actions. So what I'm saying about one, if you have the other one, you can still use it that way. Herbalist Matthew Wood prefers Monarda fistulosa and says it's important that the plant has buttery leaves. Like when you rub them between your fingers, it feels just a little bit like it has butter on it. If that's the characteristic you're looking for, I agree that fistulosa has more of that than punctata. Other herbalists think that the spicier plants are more medicinal. And so if that's where you stand, punctata seems more spicy to me. I grow fistulosa and I wildcraft punctata. And like I said, they're mostly just used interchangeably. So do you remember that rhyme? Your part is kills bugs, calms guts, and soothes alarm. Are you ready? What's bee balm's charm? Kills bugs, calms guts, and soothes alarm. I hope you said that in the background. Okay, kills bugs. Let's talk about that first. Let me count the ways. By kills bugs, I mean germs, parasites, any critter that causes problems inside and outside of the body. Bee balm is high in thymol, a substance that's highly antibacterial and antifungal. So if tissue has an issue and you need to kill bugs, that's bee balm's charm. One study, for example, found that Monarda punctata's essential oil was an effective antibacterial agent against a range of microbes that can infect the respiratory tract, bugs like Streptococcus pyogenes and Staphylococcus aureus. Kills bugs, calms guts, and soothes alarm. Kills bugs. I think one of the first ways I used bee balm was in a nasal spray with goldenrod and a little yarrow. My thinking was bee balm's thymol brought in an antimicrobial. Goldenrod is my go-to for drippy, runny noses, and yarrow for its anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and astringent properties. My husband had a sinus infection, and so I thought, hey, bee balm kills bugs. So I made basically a very weak tea with those herbs, a very weak tea. And I put it in a little nasal spray bottle, and he kept it in the fridge, but he didn't need to use it for long. So I put the little bit of dried herbs that recipe uses in little tiny Ziplocs, and I gave it to family members so that they'd have it on hand when they got their own sinus issues, and it had good feedback. And the nice thing is, so a nasal spray bottle is really small, and you don't keep an herbal preparation for long because it doesn't have any preservatives. So when you brew that up, you're probably going to have a little bit of excess liquid, but you can use that excess liquid as a gargle. So you have two things out of one herbal preparation. Just something to keep in mind. I had a respiratory infection that year and used bee balm a lot as a steam so that I could just inhale and get it up into my nasal passages and my throat and my lungs. And all of that falls a little more under the heading of kills bugs. Native Americans, early settlers, and eventually herbalists have looked to bee balm for fever and chest and sinus congestion and also UTI. It combines nicely with marshmallow there, with bee balm as the antimicrobial and marshmallow to soothe the irritated and inflamed tissue that causes so much discomfort. Monarda has been used as a douche for yeast infections. Remember I said it was antifungal? See what I mean? There's a lot of applications for kills bugs, and so if you have that part of the action memorized, then you can just kind of start thinking, okay, so there's a bacterial or a fungal infection here. Maybe I should think about how I could apply bee balm to that tissue. And speaking of bugs, bee balm has traditionally used for bee stings, a literal bee balm like the name implies. I haven't used it that way, but once for a wasp sting, I made a poultice with Monarda and plantain and received positive reviews. Just took both of those together, the dried herb, just a little bit of both, and kind of ground them up or crunched them up and made them a little bit wet and then applied it to the sting itself. I also have put some fresh plant in the blender with rubbing alcohol and just chopped it up in the blender really well and let it steep a few days and then strained it out and put it in a spray bottle that sometimes the grands get an ant bite, and that's just a nice something to just mist on them. It feels cool and soothing there. I've seen bee balm used with the phrase draws out fire. Think sunburn. Sunburn or a regular burn, or even the redness that accompanies acne when it feels like there's like fire under the skin that needs to be cooled and drawn out. In all three of those situations, a poultice can be applied to draw out fire, that heat and inflammation. Monarda infused honey, where you like literally steep the plant in honey so that the honey takes on some of the flavor of the plant, can be really soothing for sore throats. And that's one, because of the sweetness of the honey, that you can get a little one to take, assuming that they're old enough to have honey, to address any possible bugs in the throat. Oh, I thought of another way we used it. My little grandson was not very old, maybe just a few months, and he caught something respiratory, coughing and drainage that was clogging his little bitty airways just enough to keep him from resting. He'd been to the doctor. It was just something that had to run its course, but he was so uncomfortable, and there's just not much you can give them at that age. His mama wasn't getting any sleep, and it's scary when a little one sounds wheezy and so pitiful, and so we started thinking, what can we do? What do we have on hand? Oh, look, there's some bee balm, and it kills bugs, calms guts, and soothes alarm. So we made basically a strong tea and put it in his little baby bathtub, that those little ones you use with newborns, and just let him soak. And so she used his little washcloth to dribble water over his tiny chest and his body, and so he was breathing in the steam just laying there. Of course, he couldn't tell us how he felt, but it was something that we could do. Later that night, my daughter texted me that he drifted off to restful sleep, and he just looked so peaceful where before he was struggling, and she said, "My baby smells like bee balm." Moving on to the guts. Kills bugs, calms guts. Let's talk about those guts a little bit. Bee balm is sometimes brought in for leaky gut. Imagine applying it to intestinal tissue if there's a fungal or microbial imbalance there. SIBO stands for small intestine bacterial overgrowth, so you can kind of see why a plant that is antimicrobial might be indicated. Or for something more acute like diarrhea that's caused by a pathogen or a parasite. Bee balm has been used for flatulence, for gas. And I'm wondering if that's both because bad bugs in the gut produce gas, so if you can eliminate them, there's less, and maybe also because it's relaxing to the nervous system, especially the nerves and tissues of the digestive tract. But we'll get to that. Another way I used bee balm personally, I struggled for a while with an ulcer and it just wouldn't go away. Helicobacter pylori, H. pylori, is a bacteria that lives in the stomach all the time. But when there's overgrowth, it weakens the stomach's protective lining so that stomach acid eats away and gets at the tissue underneath, and if that goes on long enough, a sore can form. So you can't always just like be nice to your stomach and eat bland foods and take antacids or whatever and have things go away, because if H. pylori is a root cause, then the most effective thing is going to have to address that too. So you need something that kills bugs, right? And remember I told you bee balm has just like this kind of, wow, that's astoundingly not good taste. Well, when my stomach was hurting so badly and I'd been, waiting and trying different things and nothing seemed to be helping it, I told myself I was just going to deal with the taste of the bee balm and I was going to give that a try. When you have a stomach issue, it just makes sense that it might be a good idea to get whatever you're using to address it into direct contact with stomach tissue, right? So drinking a bee balm tea exposed my stomach tissue to the thymol in the plant and to all of its other actions. But when I drank it, at that point, my stomach was soothed by it, like putting ointment on a burn, draws out fire. So I've had it as a tea a handful of times, and when it was the right herb for the situation, it's like my body recognized that, and the taste wasn't so bad. It was more therapeutic because there was almost like an answering response in my body. So the good news is it doesn't seem to take a lot whenever the tea is used. I think I've never had more than half a cup. About halfway through, I just got this, I've had all I want right now feeling. I'm not going to drink anymore. And it's like the body just knows, because it actually was enough. Kills bugs, calms guts. It really did, both for me. I also took raw garlic because that's such a fantastic antimicrobial. Bee balm and raw garlic, it was worth to work to get it in. Neither one of them is something that's just delicious by itself, but in my situation, the two things together turn things around. One use that surprised me is that bee balm has been used for infant colic. According to ethnobotanical sources, Native American groups called it the baby saver plant for its use in infant colic. They reportedly made it into a light tasting tea and gave it to a colicky infant warm. So calms guts even for babies. Kills bugs, calms guts. We covered those. And soothes alarm. Soothes alarm. Bee balm acts on the nervous system. Some herbs that are nervines, they help with stress, and it's like they're more about feelings. So something happens and then you have an emotional reaction. Like linden is a hug in a mug. The herb linden, Tilia species, you might brew up a cup when you're feeling sad or lonely to feel comforted or to have a little emotional lift. So you're hoping to move from sad to comforted. It's about feelings. Passion flower can be a useful ally when anxiety spikes. Just a few drops of a passion flower tincture. Sometimes people say they were anxious and then they become calm. And again, that's feelings. Bee balm, I feel like it has to do more with the physical nerves than the emotions. Something happens and you feel like your nerve endings are just vibrating and buzzing in an unpleasant and disorienting way, and it's just like really jarring fingernails on a chalkboard, completely overstimulated to the point of being frazzled in a really, really bad way. Bee balm, it doesn't support the nervous system like by making you feel peaceful or happy or sleepy or whatever. To me, it feels like it travels down the actual nerves all the way to the endings where things are kind of going bzz, 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 and sort of settles things down. If you look at the flowers, bee balm's flowers, especially Monarda, fistulosa, and didyma, the flowers are a circle, and then they have petals coming off of that circle going in every direction, almost like a person with their hair standing on end. When you that's a doctrine of signatures thing. When you feel like your hair is standing on end, remember bee balm's charm is in part its ability to soothe alarm. It's been used as a nervine for depression, anxiety, and insomnia. Herbalist Matthew Wood says, I've never seen another remedy which acts so deeply on the nerves, and that's saying a lot. He uses it specifically in Meniere's disease, vertigo, and tinnitus. According to the National Institutes of Health, thymol is a potent antioxidant that research suggests supports brain and cranial nerve health. Bee balm encourages thymol and bee balm encourages circulation to the head and neck, which might be why it's supportive for those inner ear issues like tinnitus or vertigo that's caused by an inner ear imbalance. Goodness. I have another story. We live in the country, and one evening when I was looking out the window, I saw a ton of wild hogs. I don't even know how many, like more than 20 down the hill from our house, and they tear stuff up, and they were headed toward my garden. And normally my husband takes care of things like that, but he was in the shower and I didn't want to wait for him to get out. So I grabbed what he usually uses to make a very loud boom and scare them away. And I went outside, and it did not even cross my mind to put in hearing protection. Who knows why? But anyway, I fired in the direction where they were, and I immediately felt this like flare of pain in my head followed by intense ringing. And I found out later that I had a perforated eardrum. And y'all, I have a whole new sympathy for kids with ear infections. Sound was just painful for days in public. I couldn't make sense of anything. If I tried to go in the grocery store or a restaurant, I just like was exhausted almost right away. My working ear and my injured one, it was like they couldn't get the signals to sync up. And I had to leave the room when my husband put you know how you put your cup in the door of the fridge and the ice cubes drop into it. The first time that happened, I just about like came out of my chair. The sound was just painful, and everything felt like it made my nerves vibrate, like they were doing that zzz thing. I was so thankful at that point, from my herbalist mentor, I told her what had happened, and she reminded me of bee balm's action. Bee balm's charm, it soothes alarm. Bee balm's action on the nervous system, and especially for things that affect the head and ears. Again, when it was the right remedy, the tea didn't taste that bad, and it had an immediate steadying, grounding effect on what before was flashing red. It really did soothe alarm. I know that's a lot of stories and a lot of uses, and that's definitely not all, but I think that gives you a pretty good start on bee balm. So practice one more time. What's bee balm's charm? Kills bugs, calms guts, and soothes alarm. And if you really commit that rhyme to memory, it'll help. Anytime you need a strong antimicrobial action, when there's something to do with the digestive system, or when your nerves feel like your hair's on fire, you can give bee balm a try. The herbarium lists the adult dose for an infusion. That's like a tea made with 1 ounce of dried herb to 1 quart of water. Then it suggests having 1 to 4 fluid ounces up to 3 times a day. Good luck getting it in unless you just, Anyway, I'm thinking of the taste of it. What's easier is a tincture. If you can get one made with fresh or dried herb, it's 2 to 4 milliliters 3 times a day. Safety-wise, large doses should be avoided during pregnancy, and some people get nauseous when they combine bee balm and valerian. So use caution if you're putting the two of those together. Valerian root sometimes is also brought in when there are nerve issues, or when somebody's having trouble sleeping, or when somebody's having issues with pain. So I can see why those might get put together. If that's something that you're thinking about, you might kind of start slow and sparingly, and hopefully be okay there. But with bee balm, you're not going to mess up. Just go get some and dry it, and next time there's an opportunity, give it a try. And if you're thinking about working with an herbalist to optimize your wellness routine, did you know that I offer consultations? Find out more about that on my website at gracerootedherbalist.com. And until next time, keep practicing your rhyme and go get some bee balm and start using it. Bye!